Welcome to the Sleepy Cosmos channel, a place where science and serenity meet. Here we explore the quiet wonders of the universe, from dark matter to string theory, all told in a calm, soothing rhythm designed to help you relax, drift, and dream among the stars. Each video is a guided journey through the cosmos, slow, meditative, and filled with real science wrapped in gentle storytelling. So if you love space, curiosity, and the peaceful side of knowledge, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe for more new sleep narrations every week. And if you'd like to reach out for collaborations or business inquiries, you can contact us at the sleepycosmoschannel@gmail.com. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and let's drift into the universe together. You are here now, a listener in the quiet dark, settling into stillness as the world around you softens and the mind begins to loosen its grip on the rhythm of the day. Breathe gently without forcing anything, and let your attention drift like a slow current in a wide river. In this calm space, we will explore something deeply human, something you may have noticed again and again as the years unfold. Time, the silent dimension through which your life moves like a constellation gliding across the night sky. When you were young, a single day could feel endless. A summer seemed to stretch like an open horizon of possibility. Waiting for a birthday or a holiday felt as though the calendar itself were carved from stone. And yet somewhere along the way, the seasons began to pass more quickly. Years folded into one another, memories layered and blurred. And the quiet realization emerged. Time now feels faster than it once did. This feeling is not a flaw in perception nor a trick of nostalgia. It is a window into the workings of the brain and the mind and memory itself. In this gentle journey, we will explore how the brain constructs the experience of time, not by counting seconds or ticking gears, but by weaving perception, attention, and memory into the story of your life. Let the scientific ideas come to you slowly, softly, without effort. You do not need to analyze or judge or remember. Just allow the thoughts to drift past as you rest. Time in the physical sense is steady, a constant backdrop measured by motion, rotation, and change. But the time you feel, the time that lives in your inner world, is not measured in units. It is measured in experience, in depth, in memory, in awareness. This psychological time expands and contracts like a living fabric. Sometimes moments stretch wide and luminous. At other times, entire weeks, even months, seem to pass unnoticed. As you rest here, you may notice how your mind gently observes the subtle difference between clocks on the wall and clocks inside the mind. The outer clock is mechanical, but the inner clock is biological, cognitive, and deeply personal. It is tied to the ebb and flow of your nervous system, to your attention, to the way your brain encodes experience and stores it as memory. And this is where the mystery begins. Because the brain is not a passive recorder of reality, it does not store every second, every detail, every sensation. Instead, it builds patterns, highlights what matters, condenses, compresses, and weaves experience into meaning. So as the years accumulate and the mind becomes more practiced at understanding the world, fewer moments feel as astonishing or new or striking. And so in memory, whole stretches of life may feel lighter, thinner, faster. It is as if the pathway behind you has become smoother with use, and the footprints left behind are spaced farther apart. For many people, this realization arrives quietly, perhaps while looking through photographs or remembering childhood. Or noticing how quickly another year has passed, the mind asks softly, why does time feel as though it is speeding up? And beneath that question, another one rests. What does it mean to live inside a brain that shapes time from the inside out? You may imagine the brain as a living landscape, neural pathways like winding streams, memories like delicate stones resting along the shore. Every sensation, every thought, every moment of awareness passes through this landscape. Some moments carve deep channels, others pass lightly like wind across grass, and the richer the imprint on the neural landscape, the more substantial that moment feels in hindsight. Time in this sense is not only something that happens to you, it is something the brain assembles. A construction of perception anchored in biology, supported by chemistry, and sculpted moment by attention. In childhood, nearly everything is unfamiliar. First sounds, first friendships, first experiences of joy and confusion and awe. The brain responds to these unknowns with heightened attention, encoding details, building new pathways, marking experiences as meaningful and new. This richness in memory makes those early years feel full, expansive, slow, as if each day holds more weight. Later in life, patterns stabilize, routines form, the world becomes more predictable, and so the brain conserves energy, encoding less detail in familiar experiences, and when memory holds less detail, the past seems to shrink. This is not melancholy, it is simply how a predictive brain learns to operate efficiently. Even now, as you rest, your brain continues this subtle work, filtering, predicting, soothing, prioritizing what matters most for survival, for meaning, for continuity of self. And within that work, time is shaped, felt, lived. As you listen, allow the mind to soften, noticing how gently the inner clock beats, not in seconds, but in sensations, in awareness, in the quiet rhythm of being alive. Perhaps you notice that you are already drifting, thoughts slowing, breath deepening, body releasing effort. This is the ideal state for exploring psychological time. A soft curiosity without strain, a willingness to simply observe, because the experience of time is inseparable from the state of the nervous system. When the mind is tense or threatened, moments may stretch. When the mind is safe or engaged in routine, time may vanish. And across the lifespan, these subtle shifts accumulate. They shape your story. They contribute to the deep intuition that time flows differently now than it once did. As you rest here, you are participating in one of the brain's oldest activities, making sense of experience, finding coherence in the flow of moments, constructing an inner timeline. And tonight, you are simply observing it with kindness, with patience, with an open sense of wonder. The goal is not to control time or to change your perception. The goal is to understand with calm clarity how this feeling arises. Understanding itself can be soothing. It brings order to the quiet mystery of lived experience. So let your awareness rest lightly on the idea that your perception of time is a natural consequence of how memory, attention, and prediction interact. A biological symphony playing softly beneath consciousness. You may picture this symphony as a slow spiral, carrying you gently forward, not too fast, not too slow, just steady, like the turning of a planet around a distant star. And within that turning, your life unfolds, not as a series of perfectly measured intervals, but as an ever-changing tapestry of felt experience. Time in this inner sense is not rigid. It breathes, it stretches, it sleeps and wakes and folds. And as you notice this, you may feel a subtle sense of peace, because the speeding up of time is not a failure nor a loss. It is simply the natural outcome of a brain that has learned much, that has grown wise in pattern and rhythm, that has walked familiar paths enough times to know the way. So rest in that wisdom. Let the mind loosen, let the body soften, let your awareness drift. You are safe, you are present, and the flow of time continues gently forward, carrying you like a leaf floating on calm water. For now there is nothing to solve, nothing to hold tightly, only the quiet unfolding of awareness, and the soft understanding that your experience of time is woven from the biology of memory and mind. Breathe, allow the words to fade, and let yourself drift deeper into stillness. We will continue from this place of calm curiosity, slowly, gently, one thought at a time. You can imagine yourself standing quietly at the edge of your own life, looking back over the landscape of years. Some moments stand out clearly, others blur together like distant hills in a soft mist. If you let your mind wander, it may drift first to childhood, long days that seemed to stretch forever, mornings that felt wide and open, afternoons that seemed to last from one sunbeam all the way to the next. Waiting for a birthday or a holiday was almost painful. Each night felt like a mountain, each week like a long, slow climb, and then somewhere the feeling changed. Now days can vanish, weeks slide past. You glance at a calendar and realize another month has gone, another year already folding into memory. The clock on the wall has not changed its pace, but something in the way you feel time has shifted. This is the mystery of subjective time. Time as it is lived from the inside, not as a neat sequence of ticks and intervals, but as a fluid experience, stretching, compressing, and folding according to rules your conscious mind does not directly see. The perception of time is not just a simple awareness of before and after. It is a complex construction built by the brain. shaped by how much attention you give to what is happening now, shaped by how richly your experiences are encoded into memory, shaped by how novel or familiar each moment feels, and shaped by the quiet expectations your brain carries about what comes next. In that sense, time is not just measured, it is felt. It flows through awareness like water through cupped hands, sometimes heavy and cool, lingering on the skin, sometimes light and quick, vanishing almost as soon as it arrives. You can feel this difference if you compare two kinds of days. One day filled with new experiences. Perhaps you travel somewhere unfamiliar. You meet new people. You taste new food. You navigate strange streets. Your attention is active and engaged. Your senses are awake. Now compare that to a very routine day. You follow a schedule you know. You take the same route, talk to the same people, perform the same tasks. Nothing is surprising. Nothing demands unusual attention. By the clock, both days may be equal, 24 hours each, but in your memory they do not weigh the same. The novel day feels longer and fuller. The routine day can feel thin and short, as if it barely happened. This is a clue. The brain does not simply record time like a device marking every second. It weaves experience into an internal story, and the density of that story, the richness of what is noticed and stored and later recalled, plays a large role in how long that time seems in hindsight. To understand this more deeply, it helps to distinguish two different ways of thinking about time. There is the time measured by devices, by clocks and watches and calendars. This is chronological time, external time, the same for everyone, the same whether you feel it or not. And then there's the time you actually live, psychological time, internal time, measured not in seconds but in experiences, moments felt, memories formed, emotional weight. Two people can sit in the same room for the same duration on a clock, yet one may feel that the time dragged on endlessly. The other may feel that the time passed quickly. The outer duration is identical, the inner duration is not. Psychological time depends on what the brain is doing with the incoming stream of experience. How much of it is new, how much of it demands attention, how much of it is stored in the structures of memory. You can imagine chronological time as a long, even line, moving forward at a steady pace. You can imagine psychological time as a river within that line, sometimes broad, sometimes narrow, sometimes swirling with eddies and currents, sometimes gliding straight and smooth. The brain is the riverbed. Its patterns of perception and memory shape how the water of experience flows. Inside the brain, there is no mechanical clock counting out tiny slices of time. Instead, there are neural circuits responding to change, detecting differences, registering events, marking boundaries between one meaningful state and another. The more boundaries and distinct events that are registered, the more time it feels like you have lived. Now imagine how this plays out across development. In early childhood, almost everything is a first. First steps, first words, first days at school, first friendships, first time seeing the ocean, first time tasting something new, first time being truly surprised. The brain is still building its internal models of the world. It has not yet learned which patterns are stable, which events are predictable, which details can be safely ignored. So it pays close attention to almost everything. Sights, sounds, textures, voices, routines, emotions. This high level of attention means that early experiences are encoded richly. Neural circuits are very active, connections are forming rapidly. The memory archive of childhood is thick with detail. When you look back on those years, they seem full, crowded with landmarks. The path of time winds slowly through them. Each year feels immense. As life continues, the brain learns. It becomes efficient. It recognizes familiar situations and predicts what will happen. It knows how to walk, how to talk, how to navigate social rules, how to perform daily tasks. With each repetition, less attention is needed. The brain does not need to record every detail of a commute it has made hundreds of times. It does not need to fully encode each similar conversation, so it begins to compress, to store less, to treat familiar moments as patterns rather than unique events. When you reach adulthood, much of daily life is composed of these patterns: work routines, household tasks, social interactions you have practiced many times. They are not unimportant, but to the predictive brain, they do not carry the same level of surprise. This change in novelty shifts the experience of time. Because psychological time is closely linked to how many distinct events are registered and stored. The fewer new events, the fewer vivid boundaries between one state and another, the smoother and faster a span of time feels when you look back on it. In childhood, a school year can feel enormous, packed with first experiences. In middle age, a year at work can slide past with only a few distinct highlights. The same chronological duration, very different psychological density. Another factor is simple proportion. When you are 5 years old, 1 year of life is a large fraction of all the time you have ever lived. If you imagine your life as a strip of paper, that single year takes up a vast portion. When you are 50 years old, 1 year is a far smaller fraction, a much thinner slice of the entire strip. Your sense of scale has changed. Of course, the brain does not consciously calculate fractions of life lived, but there is an intuitive feeling that a year is more substantial when it is 1/5 of everything you have known, and more modest when it is 1/50th. This shift in proportion blends with the changes in novelty and memory density, so that each new year feels less like vast, unexplored territory and more like a familiar segment in a longer sequence. Overlay this with the role of attention. Attention is the gatekeeper of conscious experience. What you attend to is what enters awareness. What passes through awareness is what can be encoded into memory. When attention is focused, time feels full. You notice details. You track sequences. You feel each moment more clearly. When attention is scattered or dulled by routine, experience flows through with less conscious registration. Time can seem to disappear. You may have had the feeling of driving along a familiar route and suddenly realizing you do not remember the last several minutes in detail. You were not asleep. You were simply operating on a well-practiced pattern. Attention was not deeply engaged. In moments of danger or emotional intensity, the opposite occurs. Attention narrows sharply. You become acutely aware of details. The color of a wall, a sound in the distance, the texture of the air. These moments may later feel elongated, as if time slowed down, because the brain encoded many distinct features, stacked closely together in memory. All of this means that your inner experience of time is tightly linked to attention and encoding. Whenever life is rich in novelty and you are deeply attentive, your brain lays down dense traces in memory. Later, that period feels long. Whenever life is dominated by routine and attention is diffuse or automatic, fewer distinct traces are stored. Later, that period feels short. You can imagine memory as an archive of volumes. Each day, a book on a shelf. Some books are thick, filled with vivid pages. Others are very thin, barely more than a cover. When you look back over a shelf full of thick volumes, it feels like a long era. When you look back and see only a few slim books, the same span seems short, not because less time passed, but because fewer pages were written. The brain is constantly deciding how much effort to invest in writing those pages. It operates like a careful archivist, saving space where it can, expanding on details when it must. Repetition signals safety and predictability. The archivist responds, "We have seen this pattern before. We do not need to record every version. We can condense, summarize, save only the exceptions." Novelty signals uncertainty. The archivist responds again, "This is new. We should record more detail. We may need this later." As life progresses and the world becomes more predictable to the brain, the archivist's work leans more often toward compression. Without your conscious awareness, less detail is being written down. Time does not actually speed up, but the record of it becomes lighter. So when you leaf through the archive, it feels as though the years are thinner. Even now, you might gently sense this archivist at work, choosing without words which moments to preserve fully, which ones to summarize, which ones to let fade. There is no judgment in this. It is not a mistake. It is an efficient strategy for a brain that must manage limited resources. It simply has a side effect, the intuitive feeling that time moves faster as more of it passes. If you sit with this understanding, it can bring a quiet clarity. The sensation of accelerating time is not a sign that life is slipping away too quickly. It is a reflection of how your nervous system has grown skilled at recognizing patterns, of how much you have already learned, of how many times you have walked familiar paths. The line on the calendar marches forward steadily, but the river of psychological time shifts in width and depth, shaped by memory density, by attention, by novelty. By the changing proportion of each new year to all the years that came before, this fluid experience of time is a natural part of being an organism that remembers, that predicts, that learns. You can rest inside that knowledge, letting go of any urgency, letting go of any sense that something is wrong, and simply observing with gentle curiosity how the mind shapes time, moment by moment, year by year. As you continue to drift, you may feel the edges of individual minutes soften. They blur into one another, just as they sometimes do across the longer stretches of life. And in that soft blur, you can sense the quiet work of the brain, folding experience, compressing it, stretching it, building the story of a life lived in time. For now, you do not need to do anything with this. You do not need to act on it. You only need to rest, breathing slowly, letting awareness float, knowing that the feeling of time's changing speed has understandable roots, in memory, in attention, in the way each year becomes a smaller fraction of the whole, all of it part of the same gentle mystery. The mystery of how a finite brain experiences an ongoing flow. You are lying inside that flow now, safe, held, carried forward by the quiet current of your own unfolding story. Inside your skull, in darkness and silence, a living network of cells is constantly at work, trying not just to register the world, but to predict it, to stay one small step ahead of what will happen next. The brain is often imagined as if it were a camera, a device taking snapshots of reality one frame at a time. But this is not what it does. A camera records every detail whether it matters or not. The brain cannot afford that. It has limited energy, limited storage, limited processing power. So instead of recording everything, it makes educated guesses. Moment by moment, your nervous system is asking a quiet question. What is likely to happen next? Based on the answer it prepares, it primes certain circuits, it dampens others. It decides which parts of incoming experience are important enough to encode in detail, and which are safe to compress, to summarize, to barely store at all. You can picture this predictive brain as the surface of a calm ocean. When the winds are steady and familiar, the waves are small and smooth, the water flows with little disturbance. Only modest adjustments are needed. But when something unexpected happens, a sudden gust, a change in current, a new force on the surface, the waves rise higher, the system becomes more active, more energy is used, more detail is registered. In a similar way, when you move through familiar situations, your brain's predictions are accurate. It expects what it sees, what it hears, what it feels. The difference between expectation and reality is very small. Neural activity adjusts gently. Only minor corrections are needed. Little new information must be stored. When something novel happens, the prediction is violated. The real world is not exactly what the brain assumed it would be. The gap between expectation and reality sends a signal, a kind of neural alert. Pay attention, update the model, encode this. It may matter later. This is how the brain maintains an internal representation of the world. It uses prediction to save energy and uses error signals to know when to learn. Memory is built on top of this predictive process. It is not a separate recording device. It is the accumulation of these updates, the changes the brain makes to its internal models. And because the brain is always trying to be efficient, it compresses where it can. Memory compression is the quiet practice of storing just enough to navigate the world, enough to recognize danger, enough to maintain identity, but not so much that the system is overwhelmed. Imagine you walk down the same street every morning. You see the same buildings, the same trees, the same sequence of turns. On the first few days, your brain may encode many details: the color of a door, the sound of traffic at a corner, the smell of a nearby cafe. All of this is new. Predictions are still being calibrated. After many repetitions, predictions become very accurate. The brain knows what the street looks like, where each landmark will appear, what sounds to expect, so it no longer needs to store full copies of each walk. Instead, it keeps a compressed template, a general pattern. Unless something deviates from that pattern, unless something surprising happens, very little new information is written. To you, this feels like a commute that does not count. It takes time on the clock, but it barely leaves a trace in memory. When you look back over a week, you might barely remember those many morning walks. They blur into one another, compressed into a single idea. I went to work. Now imagine a different week. You travel to a city you have never visited. Every street is unfamiliar. The architecture is new. The language is different. Your predictions are poor. The brain cannot simply run a well-practiced script. It must constantly update, pay attention, encode, learn. By the end of that week, the memory archive is dense. Many distinct scenes, many small details. The shape of a plaza, the curve of an alley, the smell of food, the sounds of voices. All of these have forced updates to your internal model. When you look back on that week, it feels long, full, substantial. Even though the same number of days passed on the calendar, this contrast is memory compression in action. Repeated or predictable experiences are stored with less detail. Novel or surprising experiences are stored with more detail. The brain is compressing data, saving space, maintaining an archive that is efficient rather than exhaustive. To understand where these memories live, you can imagine two key regions, one deep in the temporal lobes, another nearer the front of the brain, working together like different departments in the same intricate library. Deep inside each hemisphere, there is a structure called the hippocampus. Its name comes from a shape that resembles a seahorse, curved, delicate, folded around itself. The hippocampus plays a central role in forming episodic memories. These are the memories of specific events, of where you were, what happened, who was there, what it felt like. When you experience something, sensory regions of the brain process the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feelings from the body. The hippocampus helps bind these separate features into a coherent episode, a unified representation. This was one moment, distinct from others, with its own time and place. Near the front of the brain in the prefrontal cortex, another set of circuits is at work. This region helps regulate attention. It keeps track of goals. It organizes context. It evaluates what is relevant and what can be safely ignored. When you face new situations, the prefrontal cortex helps direct attention. It signals to the hippocampus, "This is important. Encode this. We may need this information." When you face familiar routines, the prefrontal cortex leans more on prediction. It uses existing models. It allows much of the processing to run automatically, and the signal to the hippocampus may be weaker. Less detail is bound, less is stored. You can imagine the prefrontal cortex as the head librarian, choosing which incoming experiences are worth cataloging, and the hippocampus as the archivist, binding, labeling, filing them away. In early life, when much is new, the librarian is busy. Many items are tagged as significant. The archivist's shelves fill quickly. Later, as patterns stabilize, the librarian becomes more selective. Many events are marked as already known, only a small update is needed. The archivist stores a brief note, not a full volume. Over days and months and years, this difference accumulates. The archive of early life contains many thick, detailed episodes. The archive of later years contains more condensed summaries, compressed representations of repeated routines. Subjectively, this means that the early years feel longer. When you mentally scan them, it takes time to move from one vivid memory to the next. The path is richly populated. Later decades can feel thinner, with fewer distinct markers. You move from one major event to another, and the time between them collapses, not because nothing happened, but because much of what happened was predictable enough for the brain to compress. Research in perception shows a similar pattern at a smaller scale. When a sequence of events is highly predictable, people tend to judge it as shorter in duration. When a sequence is more varied and surprising, they judge it as longer. Even when the external duration is held constant, the reason is likely the same. Predictable sequences require less neural updating, less energy, less encoding, so the brain registers fewer internal changes, fewer boundaries between states. With fewer internal changes, time seems to pass more quickly. Surprising sequences create more prediction errors, more neural activity, more vivid encoding. The brain registers more internal change, and that sense of change is closely tied to the experience of duration. You can think of subjective time as a measure of how much internal difference has occurred. When the brain changes little, time feels short. When the brain changes a lot, time feels long. As the years pass, life tends to contain fewer deeply novel situations. Many daily events fit into known patterns. Your internal models are highly refined. There is less need for major updates, less internal change, so the brain compresses more aggressively. And the subjective sense of long stretches of time can shrink. Novelty still occurs, new relationships, new challenges, unexpected events. These stand out, they form landmarks, but between the landmarks the brain often runs efficient scripts, day after day, week after week. In memory, this can create what feels like a gradient, earlier periods filled with many thick entries, later periods with more subtle variations. It is as if the archive's shelves are heavy at the beginning, and gradually lighter. Imagine a long road seen from above. In its early segments there are many distinct features: sharp turns, crossroads, bridges, landmarks. As you move along, the road becomes straighter, more uniform, with fewer striking features. When you remember the road later, the first segment feels rich and long. You recall many points along it. The later segment feels shorter, even though the physical distance is the same. Your brain simply has fewer markers to anchor your memory. The passage of years works in a similar way. Each additional year adds length to the road. But the density of landmarks can decrease. The predictive brain has seen much of this terrain already, so it compresses. Unless something truly new appears, you can feel this if you think back over the last decade. You may quickly recall a few key events, perhaps a move, a change in work, a relationship beginning or ending, illness or recovery, travel, births, losses. These are the landmarks. Between them lie many ordinary days, important in their own quiet way, but not stored with the same level of detail. When you scan across that decade, your mind often jumps from landmark to landmark, and the time between them contracts. Years seem to collapse, compressed into a handful of salient points. This is not a failure of memory. It is an expression of how memory is designed, to prioritize change, to encode new information, to compress the predictable. Novel experiences are like blooming flowers in a wide field. Each attracts attention. Each is recorded. Each stands out vividly against the background. Routine days are like stretches of grass, still part of the field, still real, but more uniform, more easily summarized. When you gaze over the field later, your eyes go first to the flowers. The path between them feels shorter than the actual distance. You might gently recall a recent day that broke your usual pattern. Perhaps you visited a place you had never been, met someone new, tried an unfamiliar activity. You may notice how detailed that day feels. You can see the colors, hear the sounds, feel the emotional tone. Even if it was not long ago, it already occupies a large space in memory. Now recall a typical day of routine, perhaps last week, a day that followed your usual schedule. It may be harder to distinguish that day from the others around it. Details blur, the memory compresses. That day occupies less space in your inner timeline. Even though the external duration was the same, over long spans, this difference in memory density creates a gradient, a quiet slope down which time seems to accelerate as more of your days fit into existing patterns. As your predictive brain needs fewer updates, the archive fills more slowly. The path between landmarks appears shorter, so when you look back, it feels as though the years have begun to rush. Understanding this can feel strangely comforting. The sensation of speeding time is not a mysterious force pressing everything forward. It is the shadow of a predictive system doing its work well, compressing where it can, expanding only where it must. You can rest inside this knowledge, feeling how your own memories have been shaped by novelty, by routine, by the interplay of hippocampus and cortex, by the constant effort of a brain balancing energy and information. You are living inside a system designed to keep you oriented, efficient, able to navigate a complex world. And one consequence is this shifting sense of how long life feels. As you lie here, you might imagine your memories as layers of light, early layers thick and textured, later layers more translucent, not weaker, just more compressed, all of them together forming the story of your life. A story written not in every second, but in the pattern of change. You do not need to hold all these mechanisms in your mind. You can simply feel the gentle truth behind them, that the feeling of time speeding up belongs to a brain that has known much, that has become skilled at predicting its world, that compresses the familiar and highlights the new. In this quiet moment, your own nervous system is still updating, still predicting, still deciding how much of this experience to store. You can let it do its work. You can continue to breathe slowly, letting the understanding settle, like fine dust on the surface of a still lake, barely disturbing the water, just adding a faint shimmer of clarity. Time moves forward, the brain compresses, memories accumulate, and within that interplay, your sense of duration is born, softly, quietly, and always changing. There is a simple and profound truth about your mind. You do not experience everything that happens around you. You experience what you attend to. Right now, even in this quiet moment, countless signals are reaching your senses. The faint pressure of fabric on your skin, the exact pattern of shadows in the room, subtle sounds in the distance, sensations from your heartbeat and your breathing. Most of this never reaches the spotlight of awareness. Attention acts as that spotlight, selecting a small portion of the world and bringing it forward, illuminating it, allowing it to enter consciousness, and later to become memory. When the spotlight of attention stays in one place, when it rests on a single task or a single feeling, time feels one way. When the spotlight jumps rapidly, or drifts, or dims, time feels another way. You can picture attention as a beam of soft light moving across the stage of your life. Where the beam lingers, events feel richer, more detailed, more substantial. Where the beam skips past, events remain in the dark, barely noticed, barely remembered. This has a direct effect on the experience of time. When attention is focused and steady, you sense more internal change, more distinct mental frames. Moments become finely divided. Time can feel slow, stretched, full. When attention is scattered, or when you move through routines on autopilot, you register fewer distinct moments. Large stretches of activity are processed as a single unit. Time feels compressed, shortened, as if it slipped through your fingers without you quite noticing. Think of a moment when you were deeply absorbed in something challenging, perhaps learning a new skill, reading something complex, solving a demanding problem. Your attention was tightly engaged. You may recall a feeling that time passed quickly during the activity itself. Yet when you look back, that period feels full. You remember many steps, many details, many small shifts in understanding. The span feels long in memory because attention carved it into many distinct pieces. Now think of a different situation. A long stretch of browsing, scrolling through familiar content, scanning without focus. During that time, you may feel restless. Time may drag, but when you look back later, the period often feels thin. It is hard to recall specific moments. Experiences blur together. In memory, it seems as if the time vanished, because attention never settled firmly. Few distinct events were marked out. Attention is not just a mental preference. It is supported by specific chemistry in the brain. Certain molecules help regulate what you notice and how strongly you notice it. One of these is dopamine, a neurotransmitter involved in signaling importance and reward. When something unexpected happens, when you encounter novelty, or when you anticipate something meaningful, dopamine levels in relevant circuits tend to rise. This increase helps drive attention toward the event. It flags the moment as significant, encourages learning, and strengthens memory encoding. Another player is noradrenaline, a chemical released from structures deep in the brainstem. It helps regulate arousal, vigilance, responsiveness to change. When the environment is uncertain or demanding, noradrenaline levels rise, attention sharpens, you become more sensitive to incoming stimuli. Together, these systems help the brain decide, is this moment worth close inspection? Should we devote resources to processing it, or can it be handled by existing routines? With minimal attention, when novelty is high, when something new or unpredictable enters your world, these chemical signals nudge attention into focus. You notice more, encode more, create denser memory traces. In both the immediate feeling and later recollection, that interval of time seems larger. When novelty is low, when events follow a familiar script, these signals quiet down, attention relaxes, processing becomes more automatic. The brain still functions, but it invests less energy, time feels lighter, and later seems shorter. This leads to a subtle paradox. In some states, time feels slow moment by moment, but long in memory. In other states, time feels fast while you are in it, yet leaves behind a long, rich trail. Consider what happens in a deep state of flow. Flow is the name often given to those rare periods when you are completely absorbed in a task, so engaged that self-consciousness fades, internal commentary quiets, attention is locked in, perception, action, and feedback from the world become a single continuous loop. During flow, you may lose track of external time. Hours can pass, yet you do not feel bored. You are not counting minutes. You are simply immersed. From the outside, time appears to have flown. From the inside, there was a sense of timelessness. Later, when you remember that period, you often find that it feels substantial. You recall many details, many small adjustments, many micro-decisions. The memory is dense, because throughout the flow state, attention was highly engaged. The brain was registering a continuous stream of meaningful change, even if the conscious sense of clock time was absent. By contrast, consider a period of mild distraction. Perhaps you switch constantly between small tasks, check many things, respond briefly, skim messages. In the moment, you may feel restless, impatient, as if time is moving slowly, but attention is repeatedly disrupted, never fully anchored, never allowed to stay long enough to encode deeply. When you look back on that span of time, you may find it almost empty, few clear memories, little sense of progress. The entire block shrinks in hindsight, because attention never stabilized, and the brain did not register much internal change. Habituation adds another layer. This is the process by which repeated exposure to the same stimulus reduces neural response. When you first hear a new sound or smell a new scent, there is a strong burst of neural activity. As the brain analyzes it, assesses its significance, compares it to expectations, if the stimulus continues unchanged, the response diminishes. The brain concludes, "This is safe, this is predictable. We do not need to keep reacting strongly." Habituation is efficient. It prevents you from being overwhelmed by constant stimulation. If you could never habituate, the ticking of a clock, the feeling of your clothing, the constant hum of your environment, would all demand attention without end. But habituation also shapes time perception. When the brain responds less to repeated stimuli, fewer internal events are registered, the flow of experience becomes smoother, less segmented. The sense of duration can shrink. Think of moving to a new home. On the first few nights, every small sound may pull your attention. A creak, a distant vehicle, a change in airflow. Your brain has not yet learned which sounds are safe, which are part of the normal pattern, which are significant. Time in those early nights may feel drawn out. You are aware of many details. After weeks or months, the same sounds continue, but your brain has habituated. It has built a model. These noises mean nothing dangerous. It dampens its response. You stop noticing many of them. Nights feel smoother, perhaps shorter. The inner experience of time has changed, though the outer duration is identical. Habituation applies not only to sensory input, but to whole situations, work routines, daily conversations, scenes on a familiar commute. As these patterns repeat, neural responses diminish, fewer markers of novelty, less need for attention, less dense encoding, time feels faster. Modern life adds another overlay. Our patterns of attention are shaped by devices, by constant streams of information, by overlapping demands. Many people live with what can be called continuous partial attention, a state where the mind is rarely fully present, but rarely fully absent. It flits, sampling many things, committing fully to few. In this state, you may feel busy, even overwhelmed, yet the brain often encodes relatively little, not because nothing is happening, but because attention rarely rests long enough on a single experience to build a rich trace. At the end of a day like this, you might have the impression that time evaporated. You were active, yet the day feels strangely hollow in memory. Hours have passed, but your internal record is thin. By contrast, there are days when you allow attention to settle. You might focus on a physical task, a conversation, a piece of writing, a quiet walk. You notice details, the sound of footsteps, the cadence of a voice, the subtle shifts in your own thoughts. These days can feel slow in the moment, but later they feel complete. They occupy more space in your inner sense of time, because attention was sculpting experience carefully, not shaving off edges, not rushing past, but tracing, layering, building. This connection between attention and time opens a gentle possibility. Without forcing or striving, you can alter how you experience time by altering how you place awareness, not by adding more activity, but by making contact more fully with the activity already there. Small practices can do this, simply noticing the feeling of your breath, the exact sensation of your body resting, the subtle variations in temperature on your skin, the way light shifts across a wall, the particular rhythm of someone's voice. When you attend closely, you are not making moments longer on a clock, but you may be making them longer in your mind. You are giving the brain a richer stream of information, more internal change, more to encode. That period of time becomes denser, more substantial, less likely to vanish into compression. This is one of the quiet insights behind mindful awareness. It does not require eliminating thoughts or striving for a special state. It is simply the act of bringing attention back, again and again, to what is actually present, without judgment, without urgency. From the perspective of time perception, mindful attention increases memory richness and can soften the feeling that life is slipping past unnoticed. It is important not to turn this into pressure. You do not need to maximize every moment. You do not need to hold attention tightly at all times. The brain needs rest. It needs idle periods. It will drift. But knowing that attention sculpts time, you can gently choose, at certain moments, to be a little more here, a little more present, to let the spotlight rest rather than flicker. You might do this while drinking a glass of water, actually feeling its temperature, its weight, the motion of swallowing, or while stepping outside, noticing the exact quality of the air, the pattern of clouds, the soundscape surrounding you. These micro moments do not change the length of your day, but they can change how much of that day your brain truly lives. Rather than running on scripts, they increase the internal resolution of experience, the number of distinct frames, the density of the archive, and so they can gently stretch your sense of time over years, the habits of attention you cultivate, the degree of novelty you allow, the extent to which you inhabit your own experiences. All contribute to the broader impression of how fast life feels. In youth, novelty and attention are often naturally high. In later years, they can narrow, but this narrowing is not absolute. The brain remains capable of engaging, of learning, of shifting its spotlight until very late in life. Even now, lying still, listening, you are directing attention, you are participating in the shaping of your own time, choosing, in this moment, to attend to the inner workings of your mind. To notice, with a calm and curious awareness, how attention, novelty, and memory together determine whether time feels like a rushing river or a wide, slowly turning sea. You can let that understanding sink in, not as something to hold tightly, but as something to rest upon, like a gentle surface supporting you while you float, drifting in the quiet flow of your own experience. Deep inside your brain, beneath conscious thought, there is a quiet machinery trying to stay ahead of the world. Rather than waiting for events to arrive, the brain is constantly guessing what sound will come next, what image, what word, what sensation. It does this not as an extra feature, but as a basic operating principle. Prediction is built into the way your nervous system functions. Every moment incoming signals flow from the senses toward the brain. At the same time, streams of signals flow outward from deeper regions, carrying expectations, templates, assumptions about what should be there. These two streams meet, what you expected and what actually arrived. The difference between them is carefully measured. If the difference is small, the brain concludes the world is behaving as predicted, no major adjustment needed. Encode just enough information to keep the model updated. If the difference is large, the brain concludes something new is happening. Predictions were wrong. Pay attention. Adjust the model. Store more detail. You can imagine this as a continuous conversation, reality speaking in one voice, the brain's expectations speaking in another. Where they agree, there is calm. Where they diverge, there is learning. This predictive process strongly shapes the experience of time, because your sense of duration is built not only from what happens, but from how often your internal models must change. When the world is predictable, when each moment closely matches what the brain already expects, internal change is minimal. The nervous system runs efficiently, less effort, less correction, less need for dense encoding. Time feels smoother, shorter, compressed. When the world is unpredictable, when events depart from expectation, the brain must work harder. Its models must be revised, more processing, more encoding, more internal change. Time feels stretched, expanded, marked by distinct boundaries. You can feel this in ordinary experiences. Think of a familiar routine. Perhaps making the same breakfast each morning. Your hands know the sequence. Your brain has a well-rehearsed script, the movement from cupboard to counter, from stove to table, is almost automatic. Your predictive machinery is highly confident. It expects each action, each outcome. The difference between prediction and reality is very small, so there is little internal surprise, little need for major updates. When you look back on that morning, it often feels like a single unit, a single block of time, without many distinct internal markers. Now imagine something else, a morning when that routine is disrupted. Perhaps an ingredient is missing, a utensil breaks, or a small accident happens. Suddenly your predictions are wrong. The script you usually run cannot finish as planned. The brain must intervene, recalculate, search for alternatives, reconfigure the sequence. The gap between expectation and reality grows wider. Internal surprise signals rise. Neural processing intensifies. You may feel more awake, more aware of details. When you remember that morning later, it stands out. The period surrounding the disruption often feels longer, because your predictive system had to do more work, more internal change occurred. This relationship between predictability and time applies across many scales, in short intervals, in daily routines, and across years. Whenever the brain can rely on its models, time tends to compress. Whenever it must revise them, time tends to expand. To manage this constant flow, the brain builds frameworks, mental structures that organize experience. These frameworks are often called schemas. They are like internal blueprints for how a situation usually unfolds. You have schemas for ordinary mornings, for work days, for grocery stores, for holiday gatherings, for conversations with close friends. Each schema contains expectations, rough sequences of events, likely emotional tones, typical roles. When you enter a familiar situation, the appropriate schema is activated. It sends predictions forward. This is usually what happens here. This is how people behave. This is how events unfold. As long as reality fits reasonably well within that template, the brain does not need to encode every detail. It can treat new input as another instance of a known pattern and compress it accordingly. For example, consider a typical workday, from waking to commuting to performing tasks to returning home. Over time, your brain learns the structure of such a day. It forms a schema. The details of particular emails or specific small conversations can vary, but the overall pattern is familiar. Most days, reality stays close to that pattern. As long as nothing highly unusual happens, the schema handles most of the processing. Only small corrections are needed. At the end of the week, you may find it difficult to distinguish one such day from another. They merge in memory. Time seems to have passed quickly, compressed into a single idea. Another ordinary work week. Compare that to a rare day when the pattern breaks. Perhaps you change jobs, have an unexpected event at work, or travel to a different location. The usual schema no longer applies cleanly. Your predictive machinery must adapt. New schemas may begin to form, or existing ones are modified. The day becomes punctuated by moments of strong difference. When you look back, that day often feels longer, more substantial, because it forced more internal updating. Beyond daily schemas, there are broader frameworks, life scripts. These are general patterns for larger stretches of life, the script of childhood, of schooling, of early career, of midlife responsibilities, of later years. Societies shape these scripts. Culture, family, institutions, all contribute expectations about what life stages contain, which events are likely, which roles people occupy. Even if your personal path differs from the standard script, you carry some version of it, a sense of what is supposed to happen and when. These life scripts organize memories. They act as scaffolds. Your brain uses them to arrange what has happened and to anticipate what may happen next. When a period of life closely follows a script, it can feel predictable. The brain relies heavily on existing schemas. Updates are modest. Memory encoding emphasizes major transitions, while smoothing over repetitive stretches. Time may feel as if it is accelerating, because many days, months, even years are folded into a small number of expected events. When life diverges sharply from a script, the predictive system is challenged. Perhaps you move to a very different environment, change careers, experience a major loss, or dramatically alter your way of living. Schemas must be revised, expectations reset, new frameworks built. During such periods, the internal sense of time can shift. Days may feel long, experiences dense. You may recall these times with unusual clarity. because your brain was forced to reorganize, to build new structures. High prediction error, many internal changes, resulting in a sense that this phase of life was large, even if its chronological length was limited. The interplay between predictability and surprise, between schemas and violation of schemas, creates a rhythm, smooth stretches of time, where life closely matches expectations, interrupted by punctuation marks, moments of change, reorientation, learning. You can imagine this as a sea of relatively calm water, with occasional waves or storms. Calm intervals are governed by strong predictions. Events follow known patterns. Time glides. Stormy intervals are governed by prediction error. Events depart from expectation. Time feels intense. Neither state is inherently good or bad. Both are necessary. Calm stretches allow the system to conserve energy, to consolidate learning, to stabilize identity. Stormy stretches force adaptation, growth, restructuring of models. But in terms of time perception, the calm stretches tend to compress. The storms tend to expand. So when you scan back across years, the feeling of acceleration often comes from long periods in which life followed well-rehearsed scripts, while isolated episodes of change stand out as large islands, making the time around them seem relatively smaller. Variability within routine can modulate this experience. Imagine two people with similar daily responsibilities. One arranges life so that each day is highly standardized, same route, same schedule, same leisure activities, almost no deviation. The other keeps the same core responsibilities, but makes small variations, walks a different way home. Tries new recipes, learns small skills, visits different places nearby, talks with different people. Both live within constraints, neither necessarily making dramatic changes, but the second person introduces gentle variability, tiny disturbances to the predictive system, moments where reality differs slightly from the expected pattern. Each of these small variations reduces compression. The brain must notice, must update its model, must encode a little more detail. Across weeks and months, the internal archive becomes denser. The subjective sense of that period of time may expand. Even though the overall structure of life remains similar, predictability is not the enemy. It provides safety, stability, efficiency. But unbroken predictability, monotony without variation, can lead to strong compression, where long spans of time collapse internally, leaving the impression, where did those years go? On the other hand, extreme unpredictability, constant upheaval, can be overwhelming. The predictive system works too hard. Stress rises. The sense of time may stretch painfully, where each day feels long and difficult. Between these extremes, there is room for a gentle balance, a life with steady foundations but with small pulses of novelty, subtle departures from habit that keep the predictive brain just engaged enough to register the texture of experience without being overloaded. Applying this understanding does not require radical change. It can begin with the smallest acts, simply choosing, now and then, to step slightly outside a script, to shift a pattern, introduce a new pathway. You might walk along a different street, even in the same neighborhood. Your predictive system expects the usual scenery. Instead, it is met with new arrangements, different buildings, different trees, different sounds. The gap between expectation and reality grows. Attention wakes up. Encoding becomes richer. That short walk occupies more space in memory. You might prepare a meal in a new way, or learn a basic phrase in another language, or sit in a different part of a room, or notice details you usually ignore. All of these small acts introduce gentle prediction errors, moments where the brain must adjust, and in adjusting, creates more internal change, more markers, more time. Another way is to attend to inner variability. Even when outer routines cannot easily change, you can become curious about subtle differences, the thought patterns moving through your mind today, the emotional tone you carry into similar situations, the way your body feels. These elements vary continuously, but often pass unnoticed, because schemas also exist for your inner life. Stories such as, "This is just another ordinary morning," "This is just the same commute," "This is just how I always feel." When you gently question those stories and look more closely, you find texture, small shifts. You discover that no moment is truly identical to any other. Your predictive system still functions, but it is allowed to refresh its models, to register nuance, to encode slightly more, which again can make time feel less like a flat line and more like a finely detailed path. Understanding prediction does not mean you must constantly seek novelty or resist routine. It simply offers insight into why highly scripted periods of life, while they may be productive or safe, can later feel as though they vanished quickly, compressed by a brain that handled them with minimal updating. And it explains why moments of surprise, even small ones, can ripple outward, making the surrounding time feel larger, because those moments forced new learning, new encoding, new internal structure. You can think of your life as a dialogue between expectation and reality, between the templates your brain carries and the world as it actually unfolds. Time as you experience it is written in the difference between those two voices. When they match closely, the script runs smoothly, the days glide. You may feel another year has already passed. When they diverge, the script must be revised. You feel awake, the days expand, occupying more space in the story of your life. As you lie here, you can sense how many schemas you carry. Tiny maps for conversations, for rooms, for tasks, for entire phases of existence. They are not fixed. They are constantly being refined, and with each refinement, your inner sense of time shifts slightly. There is no need to force any of this. The predictive brain will continue its work, whether you pay attention to it or not, but by understanding it, you gain a quiet compassion for your own feeling that time has changed speed. You can recognize it is not magic, not failure, but the natural result of an organism that has learned its world, that has built layer upon layer of expectations, that compresses familiar stretches and expands the surprising ones. You can rest now, letting the gentle hum of prediction and correction move in the background, while awareness floats softly on the surface of this moment, which is always the point where expectation and reality meet, and where your experience of time is silently born, again and again. If you could stand at a great height above your own life, you might see it not as a straight line, but as a changing landscape, wide and jagged in some places, narrow and smooth in others, areas dense with detail, and stretches that look almost empty from afar. The way time feels in each of these regions is not random. It reflects how the brain met the world at that stage, how much was new, how much was routine, how intensely attention engaged, how richly memory encoded. At the beginning of life, this landscape is crowded, not with years, but with firsts. Early childhood is saturated with novelty. The first faces, the first words, the first time feeling sand, the first time tasting something sweet, the first time realizing that other minds have their own inner worlds. For a young brain, almost everything is unknown territory. The predictive machinery has little prior experience. Schemas are fragile. Life scripts have barely begun. So attention is naturally drawn outward. Senses are alert. The nervous system is ready to learn. Neural circuits are forming rapidly. Synapses being strengthened. Connections multiplied. The hippocampus, the structure that helps bind specific episodes of experience, is extremely active. It collaborates with developing cortical networks to store rich snapshots of events, where you were, what you saw, how it felt, all woven together. Even if some early memories fade later, the underlying process is one of dense encoding. Each day contains many first encounters. New textures, new rules, new emotional states. The archive fills quickly, because so much is new. Prediction error is high, the brain must constantly update, and that internal change, that continual learning, makes time feel full, stretched, thick. Think of the way a single childhood summer can feel enormous in memory. Days spill into each other, but each is packed with exploration. The scale of the world feels vast, distances feel large, events feel monumental. Chronologically, only a small number of years have passed. Psychologically, those years contain an extraordinary density of change. As children grow, they begin to form more stable schemas. They know what to expect at home, at school, with certain people. But even in middle childhood, novelty remains high. New subjects are introduced. New rules of social interaction appear. New challenges, new fears, new joys. Time in these years may already feel somewhat faster than in very early childhood. But still, days are long. Waiting for a birthday or a holiday can feel like an eternity, because the portion of life represented by a single year is large, and because anticipation itself is intense. Attention keeps returning to the future event, stretching the felt duration. As adolescence approaches, a different layer of novelty emerges. Now, The world is not only externally new, the self is new as well. The brain is undergoing significant reorganization. Networks for higher reasoning, self-reflection, and social cognition are being refined. Hormonal changes alter mood, motivation, drive, the reward system. Dopamine pathways become especially sensitive to social signals, to risk and reward, to exploration. Identity is in flux. Questions multiply. Who am I? How do others see me? Where do I belong? What am I capable of? These are not abstract curiosities. They are central problems. The brain devotes significant resources to them. Every social interaction, every new skill, every success and failure carries weight. This makes adolescence and early adulthood intensely encoded. Scenes from this period, first romances, first major achievements, first deep conflicts, first experiences of autonomy, often remain vivid decades later. The time feels long, not because it contained more hours, but because it contained many high-impact events, with strong emotional charge and large updates to life scripts. During young adulthood, there is typically a high rate of change, leaving home, starting work or study, forming long-term relationships, changing locations, exploring values, trying different roles. Each transition, each new environment disrupts existing predictions. Schemas must be revised, new routines constructed. Time in these years, even when it seems chaotic, often feels spacious in memory. You can recall many distinct chapters, short jobs, friend groups, moves, projects, experiments. The landscape is full of landmarks. As life stabilizes further, many people enter periods dominated by responsibilities, sustained work, family commitments, care for others, long-term projects. These periods can be deeply meaningful, but they also tend to increase routine. Workdays may follow similar schedules, tasks repeat, commutes trace the same routes, household duties cycle predictably. The brain learns these patterns well. Schemas become strong, the predictive system operates efficiently. Much of the day can be managed on autopilot, with only occasional updates. From an internal perspective, less novelty means fewer large prediction errors, less need for dense encoding. The hippocampus still binds events, but many experiences, meetings, emails, errands, blend together, recorded as instances of the same template, rather than as unique episodes. Responsibility itself can limit exploration. Time and energy are finite. Once basic life structures are in place, there is often less room, or less perceived room, for major experimentation, so the rate of new contexts, new roles, new environments may decrease. Years spent in this way, fulfilling important obligations, caring for others, building and maintaining structures, can later feel as though they rushed by. The calendar was full, the days were long, but the internal archive contains relatively few sharp transitions. So the brain, scanning back over that span, jumps quickly from one major event to another, compressing the time between. This does not mean those years lacked value. It reflects how the nervous system handles repeated patterns, how it prioritizes energy, how it encodes life. At the same time, biological changes unfold with midlife and beyond. Certain neurotransmitter systems, including dopamine, may gradually change, affecting motivation, curiosity, the brain's response to novelty. Shifts in hormone levels and in network connectivity can influence attention, working memory, and processing speed. These changes are often subtle and gradual. They do not erase the ability to learn, but they can alter how easily deep focus arises, how strongly new experiences are flagged as salient, how effortful it feels to update schemas. If attention becomes more easily fatigued or more narrowly allocated, the brain may default even more often to established routines, letting existing models handle incoming events with minimal conscious engagement. Memory encoding can also change in quality. Details may be stored less densely or retrieved with more difficulty. The archive continues to grow, but the pages become thinner, the transitions between events smoother, less sharply defined. From the inside, this can contribute to an impression that time is speeding up. Not because life is empty, but because internal markers have become less frequent and sometimes less vivid. Yet even in later decades, novelty remains possible. New relationships, new ideas, new interests, new ways of understanding. The brain retains plasticity, the capacity to rewire, to encode, to form new schemas, well into advanced age, especially when experiences are emotionally meaningful or personally relevant. Across this entire lifespan, certain events stand out. They function as temporal landmarks, anchors, that organize surrounding time. These might include a graduation, the start or end of a major relationship, the birth of a child, the death of a loved one, a serious illness or recovery, a relocation to a new country or city, a career change, a profound insight or shift in belief. Landmarks have several properties. They are often emotionally intense. They usually involve clear boundaries, a before and an after. They sometimes coincide with changes in role, in identity, in environment. Because of this, they are recorded strongly. The predictive system must reorganize. Schemas adjust. Life scripts are revised. The hippocampus binds many details, and the prefrontal cortex integrates new context. The event becomes a reference point. When you look back, you may not recall each year precisely, but you remember, before we moved, after we had our first child, before that illness, after I changed careers. Time clusters around these anchors. The years between two landmarks may feel shorter, not because nothing happened, but because the brain, when reconstructing the past, uses the landmarks as main nodes, filling in only selected details between. The spacing of landmarks also matters. If your life contains many distinct transitions, frequent changes in environment, role, or identity, you gain more anchors, more points of reference. Your internal timeline has more structure. The path appears longer. If large spans of time pass between major transitions, with relatively uniform routine, you have fewer anchors. The path appears shorter. Even if the chronological length is the same, landmarks can be external, marked by dates, documents, social recognition, or internal, visible only to you. You might recall the day you realized you needed to change direction, the moment a belief no longer fit, the instant a relationship silently shifted. These inner landmarks, even if invisible on a calendar, can organize subjective time just as powerfully. Across the lifespan, novelty, attention, memory processes, prediction, expectations, and event structure all interact to sculpt how time feels at each stage and how it later appears. When you look back in early years, high novelty, high emotional intensity, expanding schemas, and a large proportion of life allocated to each year, all slow subjective time. The landscape is crowded. In adolescence and young adulthood, rapid internal and external change, identity formation, and strong emotional experiences create dense encoding. Time feels full, even turbulent, but rarely thin. In midlife and phases dominated by responsibility, routines, and stabilized scripts, predictability rises, novelty may decline, attention is often divided, memory compresses more, years can appear to accelerate. Later in life, biological shifts and further stabilization of scripts can enhance this effect unless new forms of engagement, connection, and meaning are cultivated, which can reintroduce novelty and depth, even without dramatic upheaval. Understanding this pattern can bring a calm perspective to the feeling that time once crawled and now rushes. It is not simply imagination, nor purely emotion, nor an external force. It is the natural expression of a nervous system that learns, stabilizes, conserves energy, and prioritizes significance. Over exhaustive detail, you might imagine your life as a river. At its source, high in the mountains, the water moves slowly over short distances. Every bend, every rock feels distinct. Time here is dense. As the river flows onward, tributaries join, the channel widens, the current may quicken, the banks become smoother. Individual stones are harder to distinguish. The river covers more ground. In the same span, further downstream, the river may broaden still, its movement, smooth and continuous, carrying with it the memory of mountains, valleys, towns, all folded into the same flow, not lost, but integrated into a single ongoing movement. Your experience of time is like riding upon that river, close to the source. Each small segment feels long. As you travel farther, segments grow relative to what you have already seen, and the unfolding feels quicker. Yet the river is the same river from source to mouth. The flow is continuous. Every part depends on the others. Early twists shape later paths, later currents, carry water that once moved slowly high above. In the same way, the way time feels at any moment is linked to everything. Your brain has already learned, to how many patterns it knows, to how many landmarks it has crossed, to how much change it has already survived. When you feel that time is accelerating, you are sensing the cumulative effect of a life lived, of models built, of routines refined, of schemas strengthened, of years that now form a longer context within which each new year occupies a smaller portion. There is a kind of quiet beauty in this understanding. The very mechanisms that make time feel faster are also evidence of adaptation, of experience, of endurance, of growth. You have learned the world well enough that much of it no longer alarms you, no longer demands full attention, no longer needs to be carefully encoded at every step. This frees energy for what still matters, for what is still changing, for what is still possible. And at any point, even late in the journey, the river can meet new terrain, new confluences, new bends. The brain can still learn, still attend, still encode, still create landmarks that will stand out when you look back. For now, you can rest inside this picture, feeling how each phase of life, from dense beginnings through turbulent transitions into smoother stretches, has contributed to your unique sense of how time moves. Nothing has been wasted. Even the compressed years, even the blurred days, are part of the same flow, part of the same archive, quietly shaping who you are now and how you feel, the passing of this very moment. You are lying here now, at the quiet edge of your own timeline, wrapped not in years and numbers, but in the soft fabric of remembered moments. And the ones still unfolding, all around you, the outer world continues, clocks advance, planets turn, stars trace their slow arcs through the sky. Chronological time moves with perfect indifference, the same pace, second after second, day after day. Inside you, time moves differently. It bends, it folds, it stretches and compresses, according to the silent work of your nervous system, according to what you attend to, what you remember, what you expect, what you have already lived. You have seen how your brain is not a simple recorder, not a cold stopwatch, but a dynamic system, predicting, filtering, storing, compressing, always balancing how much energy it can spend against how much detail it needs to keep. You have seen how rich novelty and dense encoding can make a day or a year feel wide and spacious, and how repetition and efficient prediction can cause long stretches to shrink in hindsight as if they were folded, like paper, into thinner layers. You have seen how attention acts as a sculptor of time, where it lingers, experience thickens, where it drifts, experience thins. Moment by moment, your spotlight of awareness decides what becomes part of the story and what fades unwritten. You have seen how the brain's chemical messengers, dopamine, noradrenaline, and others, signal novelty and importance, sharpening focus when something matters, letting it soften when patterns are already known, and how this quiet chemistry shapes both your sense of urgency and your sense of duration. You have seen how your nervous system is constantly predicting, sending expectations forward, comparing them to reality and adjusting, how this process protects you, conserves energy, and silently determines which stretches of time will feel long and which will feel short. You have seen how schemas and life scripts give structure to whole phases of your existence, organizing memories, smoothing over repeated routines, highlighting transitions, and how these internal frameworks help you understand your own past, even as they compress it into a simpler narrative. You have seen how early years, dense with first experiences, stretch across your inner horizon, how the seasons of adolescence and young adulthood, filled with change, identity, and emotion, leave deep grooves in memory, and how later phases, rich in responsibility, but often routinized, can seem to speed past, leaving fewer distinct markers, even while they contain immense meaning and care. You have seen how temporal landmarks, births, deaths, moves, beginnings, endings, profound inner realizations, act like anchor points in the flow of your life, breaking the timeline into chapters around which everything else softly rearranges. You have seen how the feeling that time accelerates is not a flaw, not evidence that you have failed to live correctly, but a natural consequence of an adaptive brain that has learned much, that has stabilized many patterns, that compresses the familiar so it can focus on what is still changing, still uncertain, still alive with surprise. And beneath all of this, there is a simple, reassuring truth. Time, as you feel it, is not just something that happens to you. It is something your mind helps to create, moment by moment, through what it notices, what it ignores, what it stores, what it lets go. You cannot control this completely. You cannot slow the calendar or relive the same year with perfect awareness, but you do have a quiet influence on your own sense of time through small acts of presence, of curiosity, of gentle attention. You do not need to make dramatic changes. You do not need to fill every day with unusual events. Even the smallest shift can alter the internal record in subtle ways. Taking a new turn, learning a small skill, listening more deeply to someone you know well, paying real attention to an ordinary moment. These things invite the brain to encode just a little more, to refresh its models, to write another page instead of a summary line, and you can do this without pressure, without turning life into a project to optimize. It can be as light as remembering, every now and then, that the moment you are in is unique. It will not appear again. In exactly this form, this combination of sensations, thoughts, circumstances will occur only once in the entire history of your universe. Just noticing that for a breath or two opens a tiny space within which time feels less like a blur and more like a series of distinct living frames. As you lie here, you might let your mind gently drift back across your own timeline, not to judge it, not to edit it, just to acknowledge how much it already contains. There were days that felt endless, days that felt too short, years that crawled, years that vanished. There were seasons when you were constantly changing, and seasons when you were holding things together for yourself and for others. All of these exist together now, in the networks of your brain, in the patterns of your body, in the quiet assumptions you carry about who you are and how the world works. Some memories are sharp and bright, some faint, some exist more as feelings than as scenes. Some have woven themselves into your character so deeply that you no longer recognize them as memories at all. They simply feel like you. The sense that time is speeding up is itself a kind of memory, a comparison between how life feels now and how it felt then, between the density of change you once experienced and the density of change you experience today. Seen in this way, that feeling is not an enemy, it is information, a signal. From a brain that is tracking the patterns of your own life, noticing how routine has increased, how novelty has shifted, how predictions have become more accurate, more efficient. You might respond to this signal with fear, with sadness, with a sense of loss, but you can also respond with understanding and gentleness, knowing that this is what it means to have lived long enough for the world to become familiar, for your nervous system to grow skillful at moving through it. And within that familiarity, there is room for something soft and profound, not the frantic chase to make time slow down, but a quiet willingness to be present for the time you do have, exactly as it unfolds. You are not required to remember everything. You are not required to extract significance from every second. Your brain will compress, it will summarize, it will let many details go. This is healthy, this is necessary. Yet you can choose, now and then, to open a window, in the middle of a routine, to say, just for this breath, I will actually feel this, the way the air moves, the expression on this person's face, the texture of this ordinary task, the way I am right now, in this body, at this age, in this particular chapter of my life. These small pauses are not dramatic. They may not become flashbulb memories, but they add a little more resolution to your days, a little more density to the archive of your life. They remind the brain that even familiar patterns contain subtle novelty, subtle change, subtle reasons to pay attention. From a cosmic perspective, a human life is remarkably brief, measured against the lifespan of stars or the age of galaxies. Your entire personal timeline, from first memory to final breath, could be compressed into the thinnest line on a vast canvas. And yet, from the inside, that same life is immense. A universe of sensations, thoughts, dreams, stories, connections. Every moment you have ever lived has been experienced at full scale. There was never a day you were only half alive. The flow of consciousness filled it completely. Your sense of time is what allows you to inhabit that flow, to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, to understand change, to anticipate the future, to look back and say, this is what happened to me, this is how I became who I am. The science of time perception, memory, attention, and prediction does not diminish that story. It illuminates it. It shows you the mechanisms through which a finite brain constructs a continuous self moving through a changing world. It reveals how your mind transforms raw events into lived experience, and lived experience into a sense of my time. With this understanding, you can meet your own life a little differently. You can forgive yourself for the years that seem to have blurred, for the days you barely remember. knowing that your nervous system was doing its best to navigate complexity, to preserve energy, to manage risk. You can appreciate the chapters that feel long, the memories that remain vivid, as signs of deep engagement, deep learning, deep change. Even if those periods were difficult or uncertain, you can allow the feeling of accelerating time to be what it is, a reflection of how much you have already seen, of how many patterns are now familiar, of how far downstream you have traveled on your own river. And you can remember that even here in this stretch of the river, new currents are possible, new bends, new confluences. Your brain remains responsive, curious, capable of surprise, capable of encoding entirely new kinds of days, if and when they arrive. For now, in this quiet space, you do not need to make any decisions. You do not need to plan or analyze. You can simply rest in the awareness that the mystery of time is not separate from you. It lives inside you, in circuits and signals, in memories and expectations, in the way your attention touches the world and then lets it go. You are carried by the same physics that govern planets and stars and expanding space, but you are also carried by the gentle biological algorithms of a human brain, turning experience into a flowing narrative, into a sense of before and after, into the quiet knowledge that you are someone who has lived through many moments to arrive here. As you breathe, you can imagine time, not as an enemy, not as a thief, but as an ocean in which you are immersed. Sometimes the waves are tall and close together, sometimes the surface is smooth, almost still, but you are held, either way, supported by the same medium from first breath to last. Nothing in this moment needs to be rushed. You can let your thoughts slowly unwind. You can allow the technical details of neuroscience and psychology to fade to the background, leaving only their essence, a calm trust that your experience of time makes sense, that it has reasons, that it is shaped by understandable processes rather than by some invisible failure. With that trust, you are free to soften into rest, into the simple feeling of being here, now. At this particular point in your own unfolding, the hours behind you are complete. The hours ahead will come on their own. You do not need to grasp them. You do not need to slow them. You are already inside, the only slice of time you can ever truly inhabit, this present breath, this present heartbeat, this present moment of awareness. You can let your mind drift if it wishes or grow quiet if it prefers. You can imagine yourself floating on the gentle current of your own life, knowing that whatever speed time seems to take, you will always meet it, one moment at a time from the inside, with the full depth of a human mind that feels, remembers, predicts, and wonders. And as you drift, you can carry with you a simple, comforting thought. Time may seem to race or linger, to thicken or thin, but every instant of it that you touch is complete, whole, and enough, just as it is.